All right, Dr. Larson, if you'd like to, we can get started, and then I'm sure more people will be joining along the way.
Sure. I'm just going to do my part really quick, Andrew, to maximize the time. First of all, I'm really glad to see so many people have jumped on. This is great, and what we were really, frankly, hoping would happen. I think many of you are probably more familiar even than I of the long and drawn out struggles to sort of get our house in order, if you like, with regard to email and unifying the approaches to email on our two campuses. And I think Andrew's going to spend a little bit of time for those who are not as familiar with it, just to understand what some of the resource implications have been of trying to support that system. I think on the ground, many of us recognize, though, what those challenges are, whether it's calendaring, whether it's trying to coordinate meetings with folks on two campuses. I think we've all, and even in my relatively short 5 months, I've had some experiences with what those challenges are. Being that I operate about half time on each campus, I can kind of appreciate perhaps what many of you have been going through and trying to do that. So I think the need for this is fairly clear, and Andrew will talk a little bit more about that. I think the real questions probably just have to do with what is this going to look like? What implications does it have on my everyday work? What is the migration going to look like? What is the tools that are available to me going to look like after the migration? So we wanted to make sure through a series of opportunities like this that you had the opportunity to see the story, ask those sorts of questions. And then the other thing that's really important to me is we've tried to time this in such a way that will be minimally invasive with regard to fitting the most of the migration between academic years, so that knowing, obviously, particularly I think on our Albany campus, but increasingly in Utica too, nothing stops during the summer. We get that, but nevertheless, to try to accomplish something like this during the academic year when you're trying to support students and normal academic year activities in addition to everything else is pretty infeasible. So we have tried to time this in such a way that would minimize its impact. However, we want to make sure we fully understand what some of those impacts might be. I think Andrew has put quite a bit of effort into trying to engage the governance groups and committees of the governance groups to sort of talk this through and try to uncover some of those implications. But maybe we don't have them all. So I think that would be the other type of feedback that we would welcome as we work our way through this, just to make sure that things are considered properly as they're going to affect your research and academic activities and the work that you're trying to get done this summer. So we really wanted to understand that as well as possible, I think, as we get into this effort. So I think with that, I'll turn it over to Andrew and really just thank everybody for their investment of time to jump on here for a while today and hear this story.
Great, great. Thank you very much, Todd. I will jump through a slide deck here real quick. We have a relatively short slide deck. We'll touch on some points, and then I want to open it up to a QA session, giving everyone, as Dr. Larson mentioned, the ability to pose questions or concerns that they have. Rob Staff, if you have not met him, he's the infrastructure support manager based in Utica. He's going to help me moderate some of those questions as we go through. So let's jump into it, if I can get my slide to advance. So today I want to talk about a brief touch on the history of email at SUNY IT, SUNY Poly, as well as CNSE. I want to talk about what we are migrating, what that actually means, what steps actually are taken during that. I want to talk about why we're looking to migrate, then present a high-level plan, give some tips and tricks on how you as an end user can help the migration process and the migration path to a more efficient system. And then I have a slide on some frequently asked questions, and thanks to Nick Lejeune and the tech committee, I also have a slide based on some of the very direct questions that were posed to the tech committee for purposes of this migration. And then in the end, I'll open it up to anybody for questions if I haven't previously covered your questions as they relate to this migration. So there's a lot of data on the screen and a lot of dates, but what a lot of you likely remember if you've been at SUNY IT in Utica for a long time, you probably remember the migration from Lotus Notes into Gmail back in 2010. Fast forwarding to 2014, that's when CNSE and our coworkers in Albany separated from the University of Albany and had to move email services, those types of things. Fast forwarding to 2015, many of you may remember that's when we adopted the name SUNY Polytechnic Institute. And in turn, that allowed us to move forward and actually purchase a domain name for that new combined institution, which was sunypoly.edu as we all know it today. Fun fact, in that transition, we actually gave up the former domain that we owned, sunyct.edu, which was a much previous name change. And then, fast forwarding to 2015, we, many of you may remember, we implemented the SUNY Poly domain name in the Exchange environment in Albany. And then fast forwarding to 2019 is when we added the SUNY Poly domain name into the Gmail environment. Now, when we did that, in order to maintain mail flow within the environment, make sure mail was being delivered to the mailboxes appropriately, we had to do some really interesting things with mail flow and how email is transferred through our environment, through other environments. And we'll touch on that a little bit here in this presentation as well. So what are we migrating? What is this project? What does it mean for end users? And what are we actually doing? Well, the very first thing we need to do is stand up a SUNY Poly instance of Office 365. Now, currently, some of you may be aware, especially some of the users in Albany, we do have an existing Office 365 tenant available. However, that is set up using the SUNY IT domain back when SUNY IT was the name of the organization. So what we're actually doing with this implementation is standing up a completely new Office 365 tenant that will allow us to configure and configure as we need to stay compliant in today's area. Migrate data to Office 365. When we talk about migrating data and when we talk about this project in general, we're really focusing on email delivery, email communication, mail flow, calendar data, contact data. At this point in this project, we are not looking to remove any services that we currently provide through Google Apps for Education. We're simply looking to change the mail flow from Gmail into Office 365 so that we can secure our data in the Office 365 environment and then appreciate a lot of the efficiencies from a combined communication system. So as far as steps go, that includes migrating all of the Gmail data for all users within Gmail. Now, by all users, I mean faculty, staff, students, and we can't forget about alumni. We have alumni accounts in there as well as former faculty and maritime faculty that still have access. All of those accounts will be transferred as well. The way Gmail houses their data, it's broken up into email, contacts, and then calendar data. We're going to port all of that data into Office 365, copy that over into Office 365 to allow legacy information to be used. There's a couple of different ways you can do these migrations. You can do it in a way where you're just simply moving the data. One of the things that we want to be very cognizant of throughout this whole process is maintaining people's current business processes. Now, while there is typically some challenges built into email migrations, departments and users that are heavy users of things such as Google Forms or Google Docs, Google Drive, all of these other ancillary applications, we're not looking to touch any of those at this moment. We're not looking to remove the data out, discontinue access or anything like that. All of that data, all of those services will still function. At the very end of this migration, the only thing that will have changed is all of our users will now have access to Office 365 and all of the associated apps, and then actual mail flow will be transferred into Office 365 versus Gmail and Google Apps. So you see, I touched on the Gmail data. We also have a subset of users in Albany, the staff, faculty, and students in Albany that currently have their data housed in the on-premise Exchange environment out here. And we'll be looking to migrate all of that data into the Office 365 environment as well. Once we get data over there and once we get the data moved and we're comfortable with authentication processes and we're comfortable with everything that tested out cleanly, then what we'll do is we'll plan and schedule the change in mail flow. So anybody from a technological perspective, this includes changing the MX records, DNS entries to allow for mail to properly flow through our environment and be delivered where it should be, when it should be. And then finally, there may be some tweaking that we need to do post-integration. This isn't confirmed yet, but post-integration, we just want to make sure that all Google apps in their existing functionality are still available, because as I mentioned earlier, we really do not want to interrupt people's business processes, especially going into a new semester. So that's one of the primary reasons why we're not looking to touch those environments from a migration standpoint at all. So why are we migrating? President Larson did mention a couple of the reasons why we're looking to migrate. I'm going to dive into that a little bit further. On the previous slide, I mentioned the configuration of mail flow. A lot of people don't realize this, but as of right now, SUNY Poly has a very complicated mail flow process. So basically what happens is an email message from an outside server gets sent to Gmail. Gmail then looks through all of our environment and says, okay, is there a mailbox here? If there's not a mailbox there, then what happens, that mail message forwards out to the environment in Albany, where it then needs to go through spam filters, load balancers, and then ultimately end up in the on-premise Exchange environment. Now, while that solution works, it offers a lot of challenges when it comes to troubleshooting mail flow or troubleshooting when a user's missing a piece of mail or they were expecting a piece of mail and didn't get it. The other thing that can do is introduce a lot of confusion when it comes to how we handle spam filtering and phishing attempts within our environment. Another thing that a lot of users may notice is we don't have a unified user experience across both sites. For example, when we have a new student join SUNY Poly, or when we have a new faculty or staff join SUNY Poly, they go through the normal processes. One of those processes now, because we have separate environments, is finding out exactly what location this employee or student is going to be located at, and then setting up the appropriate accounts within those specific environments to allow them to be able to do what they want to do. In Utica, a lot of us are primary web interface users with Gmail. In Albany, it's the opposite. The majority of the users utilize Outlook as an email client, and they have since back in their days with University of Albany. So what we want to do is we want to unify that user experience across the board. It's not only going to help the end user, help new people coming on board, but it's also going to allow the help desk staff on both sites to be able to more effectively troubleshoot any issue that an end user may be having. President Larson did comment on the collaboration challenges, whether it be something as simple as not being able to share calendars or, for example, resource mailboxes, group mailboxes. Each different environment refers to them differently, and they all act differently. So, for example, we have for conference room scheduling in Albany, we utilize the email environment to keep track of those scheduling in those rooms, whereas we don't in Utica. These are just different types of things that we can kind of share the combined knowledge of both campuses to allow us to create a more efficient solution and allow our users to interact more easily with each other. Number one thing that I'm going to see as a benefit personally out of the collaboration challenges resolution is the simple fact that we'll have a global address book. Instead of users in Utica only being able to see Gmail-based users, they'll now be able to see all of the users when you go to look up an email address or contact information with our environment. Next on the agenda, as far as why we need to migrate or why we're looking to migrate, is revolving around information security. You know, I can tell you in the past month, I've probably been asked 3 different times by 3 different faculty if Google harvests our data, if they're allowed to harvest our data that's stored in their environment. The answer to that from a contractual standpoint is no, they're not allowed to do that. Our data is our data, and we reserve the right to control that. However, one piece of that is Google is allowed to maintain their data on servers anywhere in the world. So what that means for SUNY Poly is if there's anyone that's doing any kind of SUNY Poly work that contains export controlled information, we run the risk of an export control violation by having that data stored in a non-US based data center. That's one of the things that that we find a benefit with Microsoft is we can make sure that the data stays within the US boundaries. The other thing is Microsoft Office 365 has a large number of security features and functions built natively into it that we're going to be looking to adopt to move forward. Many of you, if you've logged into a bank recently, if you've logged into a credit card website recently, people are starting to see the need and starting to see the requirements for multi-factor authentication. You know, that's something that we're definitely going to be looking into as a way to help secure our environment. From the reports that I've seen from the various security groups out there, something as simple as multi-factor authentication can cut phishing attempts and phishing concerns up to 90% in the environment. So that's definitely a solution that we want to look at, but information security in general, we need to look at going forward. Service reliability. Currently, just for everybody's knowledge, right now, when a user goes to sign into Gmail, that then bounces a screen back to servers that are based in Utica, in our data center in Utica, to allow the logins via CAS. Conversely, in Albany, when a user logs into the environment, into the email environment out here, again, they're logging into email that's physically located on the campus. Now, the problem with these two solutions is those are now points of failure within our environment. So for example, if we had in Utica, we have a authentication server, a CAS server, an LDAP server, an AD server. If we have any part of authentication go down, end users are going to have trouble getting into their mailboxes and getting into their email. Additionally, with some of the way DNS it was set up, if we receive an internet issue, or if we're facing an internet issue on either campus, whether it be Albany or Utica, where the internet goes down, that's going to directly impact mail flow and directly impact our end users' ability to continue to work in such events. With an Office 365 implementation and the way we're looking at doing it, authentication is no longer dependent on campus resources. By syncing and managing our user accounts the way we do in the cloud, even if the campus in Utica or the campus in Albany gets completely separated from the internet and has no way to get out to external resources, anyone with a cell phone, anyone outside of the SUNY Poly infrastructure that can get online will still be able to send and receive email, will still be able to function, will still be able to use the Office 365 applications without issue, because all of that's now built in a manner that is not dependent directly on SUNY Poly local resources. SUNY Central support. This is a big one for campuses, smaller campuses like ours. We take for granted a lot of times the amount of time that we as employees have to complete certain tasks. SUNY Central has adopted Office 365 many years ago. So they've got a staff, an ITS staff that's built up that's incredibly proficient in Office 365, especially with some of their programmers. Their programmers are heavily focused on developing within Office 365 and heavily focused on developing within SharePoint within Office 365. So one of the challenges when SUNY Poly is utilizing an environment dissimilar from other campuses or from SUNY Central, we miss out on all of that development work that SUNY Central is doing for other campuses. They utilize their internal programmers to produce a certain code set, and then they make that available to other campuses, similar to how CCAS does with Banner. But where this really became a glaring factor for us was this past year during the pandemic. When the pandemic really hit full tilt last year, and we got the requirement that we needed to start doing daily screenings for users to be on campus, SUNY Central, by the time that directive came out, SUNY Central had already developed a full SharePoint-based, completely integrated with Active Directory and single sign-on daily check-in system for their users. They then turned around and made that code set available to all other Office 365 campuses so it could be ported into their environment. Unfortunately, because we didn't have a SUNY Poly instance of Office 365 and SUNY Poly instance of SharePoint in that moment, we were not able to actually participate and appreciate the time that was spent on that code development. We had to develop our own code in-house, which led to multiple iterations of daily screenings, multiple iterations of our reporting side of the house. I see this as a common practice that we're going to be facing going forward. As SUNY Central rolls out its plans for Office 365 throughout the entire university system, we're just going to see that happen more and more. And we're going to see it also happen in relation to communicating with other campuses and how we communicate with other campuses. Future integrations. So if you take a look at New York State in general, not the SUNY system, but New York State in general, a number of years ago decided as a state IT group decided to focus everybody and move everybody to the Office 365 environment. Now, when they did this, when New York State did this, they built it in such a way that each individual New York State agency is a tenant under the main New York State Office of Information Technology Services. The benefit of that is that then allows the different agencies to easily look up, communicate, and collaborate with other users in that high-level Office 365 environment. If we look at the CIO of SUNY, the university system now, Brian Digman, this is where he came from. He came from New York State ITS, and he has much of the same vision for SUNY and rolling out that same intertwined Office 365 tenant structure so that the university system can communicate and collaborate more easily between the campuses. And then the last thing that's on my list right here is maintenance expenses. A lot of actual end users won't necessarily even think about this because it's not something that you guys need to focus on a daily basis. But over the past year, the staff of ITS for SUNY Poly, both based in Utica and Albany, has spent over 1,500 labor hours maintaining hardware, software, and duplicating development efforts that could have been prevented had we been an Office 365 campus. So that's one of the things that we're looking to do with cash flow and financing always being on everybody's mind. We want to stop the unneeded expenses, and a lot of this migration will eliminate those duplication in efforts in labor charges, duplication in support and maintenance costs for software and hardware, as well as it'll eliminate approximately $100,000 a year in actual hardware maintenance costs, so manufacturer hardware maintenance costs. So through all of this, we're going to be able to recognize a significant savings from a hardware maintenance and support standpoint, but we're also going to be able to recognize a huge amount of savings when it comes to staff time and ability to work on other and new and innovative projects for SUNY Poly. So when is this all happening? Well, a lot of it's happening right now. You can see a very high level migration plan on the screen right now. We being the ITS group has been tackling this project pretty heavily right now with our consultants and internal to the department. We're averaging 5 to 6 group meetings a week to work through this plan, to develop the migration plan as far as the data migration, to work through all of the various aspects of this migration, what it's going to mean for end users, making sure that we can, to the best of our ability, handle and address any open concerns that end users have, as well as we don't negatively impact the business processes at SUNY Poly. So basic stuff you'll see in here is just normal implementation stuff. The one time frame that I want to call out is the end of July time frame. That is when we're going to be looking to actually change the mail flow, is towards the end of July. Now, one of the things that's going to be extremely important throughout this process is that I recognize there's a lot of faculty are going to be leaving for the summer, even vacations with staff. The students are here, all of these types of things. We're going to be communicating all of this content, all of this information weekly to all of our users so that you know when it's coming, you're aware of when it's coming, you're aware of what to do. However, if in the event that an end user does not see those messages, doesn't read the messages, overlooks them, they get thrown in a junk mail folder, whatever the case may be, in the event that an end user does miss that information, we do have our help desk available. They're more than happy to answer any questions you have. If we get towards that July timeframe and you have a concern, oh no, I haven't done anything with this email migration yet, what do I have to think about? It's as simple as shooting an email or making a phone call to our help desk, and we'll be able to assist you one-on-one to work through any challenges that you may have. So how can you help? There's a few different ways that end users can help an email migration process or a migration process of any kind for that matter. Over the years, just natural business and natural your everyday life, you're going to have different locations, different folders within your email that are going to end up storing a lot of data that you simply no longer need. Junk mail folders, sent items folders, deleted items folders, especially, these are all potential locations for data that you may not care about, may not want anymore, may no longer have a use for, it's not relevant. The recommendation and the request is that you go ahead and delete those items because if they're no longer needed, if they're no longer wanted, there's no point in migrating those into a new environment. So by simply doing things such as emptying your deleted items folder, clearing out your junk mail folder, this is going to increase our data transfer timelines or I'm sorry, decrease our data transfer timelines and only help the migration along the way. Another thing that's great to do is helping each other. We have a lot of users both on the Albany and Utica campus that have a lot of experience with Office 365, whether it be with Office 365 directly or with Microsoft Exchange or Microsoft projects in general. We have a lot of users that already have the knowledge and already know how to do it. If you're one of those power users, if you're one of those strong users and you see a coworker having a problem, my recommendation is to lend a hand. I'm a huge proponent of peer support being a supplement to conventional help desk support. So if you just have a simple question such as, how do I get to this or how do I do that? You're always able to call the help desk. However, if you know within your department or within your local area, you have someone that is proficient in it, understands it, a lot of times it's going to be a lot quicker. Just say, hey, do you know how I get here? So peer support, especially in an environment like this, is a great thing. Post-migration, the number one concern that I hear coming out of people is post a data migration.
I'm well, thank you. May I have that in 20s, please? Thank you.
And post-migration is that people tend to worry or be concerned in the event that they don't have all their data. So, for example, we transfer everybody's data through the to the new mailboxes. You go in and your sent items folder is empty, or your sent items folder is full. What we ask is that you just compare that data in Office 365 with the data that you see in Gmail. Our goal is to get through this process without having anyone have concerns about lost data. In that process, we're not going to be removing any data out of Gmail. We're simply taking a copy of it and migrating it into Office 365 so that you have it for later use. So with that being said, post-migration, you'll see communications from us talking about, hey, just go in and log into this environment, log into that environment when you have time, and just confirm for yourself to make yourself comfortable that all of the data is there and all the data you need. If you have any concerns, again, at any time, please always reach out to the help desk and we'll do everything in our power to assist or answer any questions that you have. So some of the frequently asked questions
Thank you.
Some of the frequently asked questions that I've gotten so far is, will I lose access to Google Apps? That is a big concern that we've heard from our end users in the past. Many of you may remember back in 2015 when we had talked about email migrations in the past. A lot of people don't want to lose access to Google Apps because they are integral parts of their current business processes. We aren't looking to interrupt business processes during this transition. We're simply looking to add more tools for the SUNY Poly user community and to be able to do it in a more secure and more supported environment. As such, the only thing, just to clarify again, the only thing we're going to be changing is mail flow, so that mail will be delivered into Office 365 versus being delivered into Gmail. You'll still be able to log into Gmail and see your past messages. You'll still be able to log into Google Apps. You'll still be able to utilize Google Forms, Google Docs. All of these tools are still available and accessible to you and will be going on into the future. How will I know how to use Office 365? The big benefit that I see is Microsoft has spent a lot of time in making their web products, web-enabled products, very similar to their desktop products. So for example, Outlook Web Access, or the web version of Outlook, offers a lot of the same functionality as the local user or the local email client. So a lot of the day-to-day stuff, it's going to be recognizable. If you're used to working in Word, you're going to understand and be able to recognize a lot of those same functions transferring into an Office 365 environment. From an ITS standpoint, we're in the process of building a knowledge base with all of these frequently asked questions. We're also going to be adding some instructional videos and other Office 365 resources to assist our end users in making this a smooth transition for them. And as always, I'm going to nail this one again because I think it's very important to understand, is that if at any time any end user has a concern, doesn't understand how to do something, simply needs help understanding how to get to certain things, that's what our help desk is there for. Shoot a message to the help desk, either on phone call or email, and our staff will absolutely be there to support you. So the big question is, why not wait? Back in 2015, during the migration discussions in the past, it was vocalized very, very loudly and understood and heard by the ITS staff as well as administration that doing an email migration like this anytime during the academic year is extremely problematic, both from student interaction standpoint, from administrative office interaction standpoint. It just opens up a whole nother can of worms and creates additional challenges within the environment that we would not necessarily see by doing it during a time when school is not in session. So that's why we're looking at this time period in order to be able to do it. Another question that I get that's quite along with that goes right along with that is, well, why can't we wait and do it next summer? From a falling behind standpoint, SUNY Central continues to develop new tools, continues to develop new data requirements for all of our SUNY campuses. They have a whole slew of different initiatives that they're focusing on for being able to collaborate between the campuses and obtain the information that they need from the campuses. We want to be able to be a part of that so that we're not having to recreate the wheel each time a new solution needs to be developed. We're not having to reformat our data to get it in a format that SUNY is able to utilize and able to digest. So the focus being, we want to stay in line with SUNY's direction and the direction that SUNY is going. Additionally, in the current environment and in our current configuration, we have some serious challenges as it relates to staying compliant with SUNY Central's information and security standards. So that's one of the things that's a heavy focus this year, especially with all of the higher education security breaches that we've seen take place. We've seen Siena with their ransomware attack. We've seen RPI be shut down. We've seen even Hamilton 2 years ago got hacked. Schools all around us are being compromised. We don't want to be on that list. So the best thing we can do to not be on that list is to adopt and implement the standards that both SUNY as well as the government agencies have laid out for us. So this slide is some of the questions that Nick and team on the tech committee were able to gather for me. That these are a little bit more specific questions, but I wanted to make sure to get them answered. So I'll run through these real quick. Will we still be able to use Android and Gmail? Will they work transition, or will we have to transition to another mobile client? The majority of the email clients today, whether it's Linux, Windows, Mac, mobile device, regardless of what it is, the majority of email clients today function fine with receiving email from Office 365 and interacting with Office 365. However, each application is going to have a little bit different of a configuration. For example, if you're using the Outlook app on an iPhone, the implementation of that or the connection of that to Office 365 is going to be much simpler than the connection utilizing the native mail client that's on iPhones. And the same would hold true for Android. One of the questions is, why are we migrating 2,500 students? Basically, in a nutshell, why are we migrating Utica and not Albany? Well, the simple answer is we're migrating everybody. It's not an either or, it's all SUNY Poly users. So that includes all Gmail users and all Exchange users that are SUNY Poly directed users. Will all students be given Microsoft accounts? Yes, students, staff, and faculty as a part of the migration will have access to the complete suite of Office 365 applications. Utilizing your SIT9, you'll then be able to access that environment and utilize all the tools that come with that environment. This next question is, and I jumped ahead here. This next question, how will Unix boxes and Linux boxes work with this? This one I kind of fired back at Nick a little bit. I wasn't really necessarily understanding what this question was. You know, if it's referring to what email clients are available, or if it's referring to email clients within a Linux or Unix environment, yes, those will work with Office 365 as well. Again, Office 365 is just another integrated app similar to Google Apps and Gmail. With many of the writing and tutorial services using Google Docs to review student work, will either Google Docs or a similar platform be available? As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we're not looking to eliminate any of the Google apps, so any solutions or services that faculty and/or students utilize, such as the tutoring services, those will still all be available post-migration. In addition to all of the applications that are a part of Microsoft Office will also be available as well. So we're adding functionality, not taking it away. Going forward in the future, very similar to how you've seen the campus handle its COVID response, we've set up a web page and we're in the process of building out the web page for the email migration. It's going to have this presentation as well as training material, as well as frequently asked questions. All of that will be stored right on the email migration page, and we'll utilize that link when we send further communication out in the future as well. So you'll be able to see it not only in your mailbox, but also on the SUNY Poly webpage. Finally, if you have a specific question related to your specific need and your specific implementation, definitely email us at migration.
I told you I have a meeting with my boss at 3. Okay.
And then
of course we're not gonna, never mind. You've already paid for it with someone else's money. No, it's my money.
Rebecca, I don't know if you can use that, but basically at the end, if you email this address, we'll be able to respond to your specific concerns. And who knows, your specific concern may be the same concern that other users have had, but they just didn't want to take the time to voice the concern or ask the question. By you asking the question, it allows us to populate it on the website and share that information amongst the campus. Now, in a nutshell, that is the presentation that I wanted to go through today. I wanted to open it up to questions and allow our users to ask me anything, shoot it straight. If you have a question, if you have a concern, this is definitely the time that we would like to hear about it. There may be instances during this Q&A session where I say, you know what, that's a specific issue. We're going to contact you directly on it. My staff that's on the call and Rob and myself will document the question, and then we'll reach out to you directly if we can't answer it currently right now, because let's face it, I don't know everything in the world. So any questions, any concerns, any thoughts that people have, definitely you can start either posting them up in the chat or raise your hand and we can call on you to ask the question. So we have a question from Vince Labella. Will we get OneDrive folder too? And if so, what happens to our existing shares? So Vince, you are located on the Albany campus. You have access to the V drive. That is not going away. Nothing with the V drive is going to be going away. For those that don't know, that's our on-premise storage environment. You will be getting access to OneDrive. All users will have access to OneDrive, very similar to how users have access to Google Drive as well. So it will be another potential storage location for you. I hope that answered your question, Vince. If not, definitely post up and I'll re-hit it. Ross, will the migration allow for SUNY Central to email SUNY Poly students directly? Does Office 365 include Teams? I've heard it's a great tool for collaboration. The answer is yes to everything. Ross, that Teams, especially for the work that you do, Teams is a huge tool that could be beneficial for sharing content, sharing data, as well as sharing information or collaborating with coworkers, whether it be across the country or across the office. That's a great tool. I definitely recommend users to look into Microsoft Teams. If you're not familiar with it, it's a very, very handy tool to utilize. So Ross, I hope that answered your question. Let's see here. Ron Sarner, will instructions be provided for students and staff to automate forwarding out to email environment of choice? So that's actually a very interesting question, Ron. I don't have a direct answer for that right now, because one of the things we need to do is identify what actual requirements or policies are going to be allowed in the environment. By default, Office 365 does not allow email forwarding out to an environment of choice. In addition, SUNY security policies, as well as New York State security policies, disallow the storage of SUNY Poly data on non-SUNY Poly environments. So that is definitely something that Ron, we're going to want to talk about. We're going to want to definitely bring the provost as well as Dr. Larson into that conversation, because I know that's a concern for you, and I know that's a concern for some of the other users. However, we do need to make sure we do what's right to secure the data in our environment to the best of our ability. So I'm going to put a pin in that one, and I definitely want to circle back and have a conversation in general more about that specific subject. All right, Carly, I use my Google Calendar to keep track of my activities for annual reports and have a lot of annual activities events in it for the next year. Will these be transferred over also, or still be available for reference? Yes, Carly, our goal and our plan is to transfer all data from the calendar contacts as well as the mail environment into the new environment. So what that's going to look like from transferring from Google post-migration, you're not only going to have that data sitting in your Office 365 instance, sitting in your Office 365 calendar, but as an archive, because we're not removing it out of Gmail, you'll also still be able to access that data for legacy or archival information. You'll be able to go back and check that within the Gmail environment as well. So yes, you don't have any, there should be no concerns about having to manually print out your past calendar entries or anything like that, especially when it comes to assessments and stuff. We need to be able to show the track record of things. So that's why we want to make sure all data gets transferred, including calendar entries. Sean Clive, if we're in the Utica Google Mail server but are using Outlook already, will that make a difference in the migration? So it's actually for you, Sean, it's going to make it a little bit easier for you. If you're used to using Outlook already as an email client, the interaction with Office 365 with Outlook as an email client is much more robust than integrating Outlook with Gmail. But as far as everyday functionality for you, if you're already using Outlook as an email client, you can continue to use that in the future, and it will simply connect to the new mailbox. You'll send, receive, and manage your email the exact same way. Will we still keep the separate NetID and SetNet logins for wireless and computer logins? Now, I will specify Paul is based out here in Albany, so that's why this question comes up. Albany utilizes what's called a NetID, is a carryover from University of Albany, and then Utica, of course, our logins are referred to as SitNets. Now, in Albany, the NetID is crucial for wireless connectivity and login. So they are still going to need to use the NetID for computer logins as well as wireless connectivity. But going forward, those users, our SitNets, will be the user account that we use to manage the Office 365 instance. So NetID will be used for wireless and computer logins, computer access authentication. SitNet will be used for any of the cloud-based Office 365 and Gmail applications. Emails that Matt had a question. This is actually a very good one, because this kind of speaks to the difference between Gmail, how Gmail handles mail organization, as well as how Microsoft handles mail organization. Matt's question is, he was wondering if emails that are grouped with Gmail labels will be carried over. So from what I've seen in my experience, when a mail message in Gmail is organized with a label, that's going to be close to the equivalent of separating them out in folders within Outlook or within Outlook Web Access. So during this transfer, we map out if there's a specific label for a group of mail messages. For example, I organize my messages organized under, who I received the message from. I have all my different team members, and then I keep all of their correspondence in individual folders. In the Gmail environment, I label those. In the Outlook environment, I simply slide them into a folder. During that migration process, Gmail labels will be mapped into corresponding Outlook folders. One person that experienced this firsthand was President Larson when he came over. When he first started, he originally started in the Gmail environment. And as everybody often does, to get themselves set on a new experience, they go through and get themselves organized. President Larson went through and created a large number of individual groups that he was going to organize things in. Then we migrated him into the Microsoft Exchange environment, and all of those Gmail labels ported over into folders in the Microsoft environment. So Matt, I hope that answers your question. If you have any questions concerning that or specific to yours, definitely reach out. Rules and filters. Rules and filters set up within Gmail. If you have, for example, a specific rule, that ancillary filtering in rule setup will not carry over into an Office 365 environment. So any rules and filters that are created within the web interface for Gmail will not directly port into Office 365's web access version of Outlook. So with that being said, if we do have a user that relies heavily on rules and filters to, say, manage their data, John likely does something very similar to what I do, where we get common logs that are emailed to us from hardware devices every day. Because we just want to keep an eye on what's going on and have that archival copy, we don't necessarily need to look at it every day. So we create a rule that slides that message into a specific organizing folder. Those types of things are going to have to be recreated because that data, that information in configuration doesn't port over. So I hope that answers your question, John. That can be all the questions, Kenneth. This is a lot of, the one thing I will say, this is a lot of information to digest. We will be posting this presentation on the email migration webpage so that you can view it after the fact. With it being a lot of information to digest, we're definitely going to want to take time to think about it after. If you have questions, either email the help desk or that migration at SUNY Poly email, and we can answer that information directly. We do have a couple more questions. Question from Alyssa. Our office utilizes Google Hangouts in the sidebar to talk with coworkers throughout the day. Does Office 365 offer something similar? It actually does. Utilizing the Teams application, you can do a lot of that instant messaging and communication with coworkers. The other thing that I'm going to point out, Google Hangouts won't be going away. That'll still be a solution that your office can utilize going forward. So there will be no direct impact to your day-to-day operations with that process. Repeated questions, but I shared different planned content on Google Calendar with our social media committee. Will that content stay in the migration and still be shared with those individuals? So Mike, we're going to want to take a look specifically at how you're sharing that content, where you're sharing that content from. To answer your question directly, if you're sharing calendar with another user. For example, if you've created a calendar within your Gmail and you're sharing that with another user, the data for those calendar entries will be shared over. But what we will have to do is we will have to evaluate and set up the sharing after the fact between the individual users. And there's actually a number of different videos and instruction sets that we can provide if an end user wants to share their calendar personally. There's instructions all over the place that we can provide for them to be able to do that without needing ITS support. One benefit, though, of us not being able to migrate those shared calendars is a lot of times in our environment, just due to people changing positions and due to people coming and going, we may be sharing a calendar or sharing data with another user that is no longer in that same position, no longer needs to have access to that same data. This is one definite way that we can clean up all of those inappropriate permissions within the environment. So, but Mike, definitely reach out if you have any specific questions on that, and the team can work with you on that. Paul has another question out of Albany. Will shared room calendars at Albany site still work? So the way we're handling that, Paul, is there's a subset of conference rooms in Albany, or rooms in general, whether they be classrooms or conference rooms, that are under the management of SUNY Poly administration. Those mailboxes, those rooms will be migrated into the SUNY Poly Office 365 environment. Those rooms, offices, and conference rooms that are not under SUNY Poly administration, those will go into a different environment. So they won't be in a shared environment. And that's where we'll need to utilize, the administrative assistance from the various organizations out here to assist with scheduling. Ron, to your question, no, you'll be able to forward messages out of the environment, but we're not going to be able to set up without further discussion an automatic rule that forwards. For example, we have some of our users out there that are forwarding all of their email to a private mail server. It's they basically forward all of their email out of the SUNY Poly environment into their personal environment, and then interact with students and or staff from their personal email account for whatever reason. Obviously, from a security standpoint, that is extremely frowned upon, and in most cases is against the security policies and procedures that New York State and SUNY have in place. But to forward individual messages to an external user, no, you will be able to send those fine, just as well as send a message to anyone outside of the environment. All right, I think I made it through all those questions. Rob, do you see anybody with their hand up that I haven't seen?
I do not.
Okay. Well, I do want to say that I appreciate everybody taking the time to listen to me ramble this afternoon. I know it was a lot of content, but it's a large project. The college and the ITS group are moving extremely fast to introduce the least amount
Oh, you
of
did get out. Yes. Okay.
negative impact into the environment as possible. So the more information you can share with us, the more we can support you. So again, I thank you everybody for the time. President Larson, I don't know if you had any more comments.
No, I really don't. It's just, I just wanted to repeat what Andrew's already said, which is keep your comments and questions coming. We provided, I think, in the brief some ways to do that. And also I want to thank Andrew for being willing to do this multiple times over the last few weeks. I do think it's important, and I'm really appreciative that you and your team put this brief together and so everybody knows what to expect. So thank you, everybody. And thank you, Andrew.
No problem. Thank you all very much. If anybody has coworkers that were not able to attend, we are going to post a recording of this video on the page as well. So once that's set up, we'll send out a message to the campus community that it's there and available. And hopefully other users can then walk through this recording and learn as well.